Intro.
The R selection and K selection. So while reproductive strategies play a key role in life histories, they do not account for important factors such as limited resources and competition. The regulation of population growth by these factors can be used to introduce a classical concept in population biology, that of K-selected versus R-selected species. So each plant or animal species, so whether it's pelagic or benthic, marine or terrestrial, has a distinct set of biological and ecological characteristics that define its life history. So later on, we will be going to know what are those R-selected species and K-selected species and their characteristics. But before that, term R and K selection was coined by the ecologist Robert MacArthur and E. MacArthur. So it pertains to the choice of characteristics in an organism that trade off quantity and quality of spring. So in other words, the terms R and K refer to different portion of growth curve. So this figure, this is the logistic growth curve. So as we can see, the population increases fast at first and then slows and eventually stops growing as it meets the environment's carrying capacity. So K is the maximum population size at carrying capacity and R is the rate of population growth. So R is the intrinsic rate at which a population can increase and K is the maximum population density that can be supported by the environment. So populations that are at or near the carrying capacity of the environment will be influenced by the parameter K, and R, or the populations that are kept at low densities by either abiotic or biotic environmental factors, are influenced largely by the parameter R. So later on, we will be going to discuss about the differences between R-selected species and K-selected species in their characteristics. But before that, let us go first with the R-selection species. So R-selection species are eventually called opportunistic species. They are called opportunistic species because they are able to respond quickly to favorable conditions, and or they could be able to cope up to a new habitats by rapid rate of colonization and reproduction. So they typically lived in an unpredictable environment. The reason why they are called an opportunistic species. And then the next one is the K selection. So the K selection are, on the other hand, are called equilibrium species. So from the word equilibrium, which means balance, so this species in K selection, it lives in a constant or predictable environment, or in an area where there are less disturbance, since they require sufficient time to complete their life cycles. So let us go to their differences. So let us go first to the R selection or the R selected species. So R selected species are those species that usually small in sizes and they reach sexual maturity early. So they usually produce many young several times per year. But this opportunistic species typically live in variable or unpredictable environment. The reason why they are called opportunistic species because they are able to respond quickly to favorable conditions or new habitats by rapid rates of colonization and reproduction. So however, our selected species typically have little ability to compete with other species. It is because they are small in sizes, so they don't have that really ability to compete with those species, especially those larger ones, and they have high mortality. So consequently, populations of opportunistic species tend to be short-lived. So madali silang namamatay, and our selection leads to high biological productivity as the organisms devote a large proportion of their variable energy to rapid growth and reproduction. So, yun siya yung kaibahan, yung R selection species, yun yung mga characteristics niya. It exploit rapidly changing environment. It is short-lived. Population size, highly variable. Density independent mortality, yung computation nila is low. So forth, and also small body size. So usually our selected species is mga maliliit na species. Yan sila, pero mabilis sila na madali silang magparami or madali silang dumami. And then let us proceed to case selection or the case selected species. So case selected species usually lives in a predictable habitats. So they are larger in size but slow growing, yet long-lived. So they take longer to reach reproductive maturity and produce fewer young. But death rates are fairly low. So matagal silang namamatay. They are particularly adapted to live in areas that are not subject to frequent disturbance because, as what I have said a while ago, they are an equilibrium species, and so they require sufficient time to complete their life cycles. So they tend to build up their population sizes to the maximum that the environment will sustain. So, for example, yung carrying capacity of the environment. So, they sustain this population size for long periods by utilizing the resources very efficiently. So that was the case selected species. They lived in predictable and stable environment. They are long-lived, population size stable, density dependent mortality. Yung computation nila is high, and then they are large in body size. So usually case selected species is malalaki. The reason why in competition they are kanang mas lamang sila when it comes to competition compared sa R selected na mga species. So R and K selection, so it was used extensively and successfully to study populations. So the concept of R and K selection can be applied to pelagic as well as to benthic marine organisms, and it is also used in terrestrial ecology. So it should be noted that the different patterns are applied in a relative sense to organisms. So for example, although yung phytoplankton as a whole have short life cycles compared to whales, within the group there are both are selected sila and K-selected phytoplankton species. So it should further be stressed that the majority of organisms possess a kanang mixture of R and K features. So the importance of examining contrasting lifestyles lies in recognition of the ways in which different species deal with competition, predation, and environmental change. So, the R and K selection, according to some research, not all species follow the R and K selection theory. So, just like yung example na phytoplankton, so new models of life history are being developed which incorporate R and K selection with additional factors that affect life and survivorship, such as population age, structure, and mortality factors. So, yun siya sa R and K selection. So, let us go